She was dismissed the moment she stepped through the grand oak doors of the Blackwood estate. A simple linen dress, the color of a stormy sky, a faded cardigan draped over her shoulders, and quiet flats were all it took to earn the collective sneer of the room. Here, among the polished heirs with their razor-sharp smiles, she was an anomaly, a misprint in a book bound in leather and gold. A man whose silk tie shimmered like a freshly minted coin was the first to speak, his voice a condescending drawl. "Did someone order from the staff quarters?" He murmured to his companion, loud enough for the sound to ripple through the champagne-sipping crowd. Alara Vance stood near the entrance, her hand clutching the worn cloth strap of her shoulder bag. She offered no retort, her expression unreadable. To them, she was a ghost at a feast, an outsider who had wandered into a hallowed hall meant for bloodlines, legacy, and status. They saw her plainness and assumed it was the full measure of her worth. They couldn't have been more wrong, because the woman they were so casually humiliating was the wife of the man they were all here to inherit from, and this entire, gilded charade was a test she herself had helped design. The Blackwood estate was a fortress of old money, its stone walls and iron gates standing sentinel against a world it deemed unworthy. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the scent of polished mahogany, aging leather, and the sweet, cloying perfume of roses arranged in vases that cost more than a common person's monthly wage. Crystal chandeliers, like frozen waterfalls, hung from the vaulted ceiling, fracturing the morning light into 1,000 glittering shards that danced across the 42 relatives, investors, and advisors gathered within. Each was a study in calculated elegance, tailored suits that whispered of Savile Row, silk dresses that flowed like liquid jewels, and diamonds that winked with every practiced gesture. Alara slipped between them, a shadow moving silently across the marble floor. She found a corner by a tall, arched window that framed the misty hills beyond, a canvas of soft greens and grays that mirrored her own quiet attire. Her dress was simple, chosen for comfort over style, the fabric soft from years of loving wear. Her cardigan, a pale blue that had long since surrendered its vibrancy, hung slightly off one shoulder. Her dark hair was gathered in a low, unpretentious bun at the nape of her neck, a few stray strands escaping to frame a face that held its own solemn beauty. At 36, she possessed a grace that didn't shout for attention but lingered, like a half-remembered melody. Caelan Sterling, Sterling Blackwood's second cousin and the man with the gold tie, leaned against a heavy credenza, the face of his Rolex catching the light as he smirked in her direction. Seriously, he announced to a cluster of cousins, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain, "Who let the cleaning staff in? It's terribly unprofessional." His sister, Serafina, a woman poured into a crimson dress, tossed her immaculate blonde hair. "Perhaps she's here to dust the will before it's read," she added, her comment eliciting a fresh wave of sharp, brittle laughter. They were vultures dressed in finery, and they had found their quarry. Alara remained still, her gaze fixed forward, her silence an unsettling counterpoint to their clamor. They saw weakness, a lack of belonging. They couldn't see the bedrock of resolve just beneath the surface. The room's ambient cruelty began to coalesce, finding its focus on the silent woman in the corner. Across the hall, Brielle Calloway, a niece with a fledgling tech startup and an ego inflated by 1 million social media followers, nudged her friend. "Bet she's one of his charity cases," Brielle whispered, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry. "Or a forgotten mistress looking for a pity payout. Look at that bag. It looks like she's carrying her lunch in it." Her friend snickered, discreetly angling her phone to snap a photo of Alara. "This is going straight to my story," the friend whispered back. "Number Blackwood will flop." Brielle's fingers flew across her own screen, her smirk widening as she composed her caption. She read it aloud, ensuring Alara would not miss a single syllable. "Found Sterling's charity case crashing the will reading. Guess she thinks thrift store chic gets you $1 billion. The circle around her erupted in laughter. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, the blue light of their screens illuminating faces twisted in amusement as they liked and shared the post. Instantly, the digital ether filled with poison. Strangers from across the globe chimed in, calling Alara desperate, a nobody, a leech. Their words formed a digital pillory, echoing the disdain that filled the physical room. Alara stood motionless, her hazel eyes catching the faint glow from Brielle's screen, but she did not speak. Her composure seemed to infuriate them, her refusal to be broken, a silent challenge they felt compelled to win. Poor thing, Brielle's friend cooed with mock pity. She doesn't even know she's a meme now. The laughter swelled, a vicious chorus that sought to strip Alara of her humanity, turning her dignity into a target for their sport. Alara's fingers tightened for a brief moment on the strap of her cloth bag, a simple, sturdy thing, stitched with care, bearing no designer logo. She didn't look at Brielle. She didn't acknowledge Kaylin's taunts or Seraphina's barbs. She simply stood, her breathing even, her gaze fixed on the empty leather chair at the head of the room where the lawyer would soon sit. Their cruelty, however, was not yet sated. Jackson Cole, a distant cousin in a pretentious velvet blazer, caught the eye of his friends and whispered, "Watch this." He plucked a cocktail napkin from a passing tray, scrawled the word Begar on it with a Sharpie, and, in a moment of feigned clumsiness, slipped behind Alara. With a deft movement, he tucked the napkin into the strap of her bag, where it hung facing the room, a crude brand on her back. A new wave of snickers spread like wildfire. Fingers pointed, whispers grew bolder. Clara snapped another photo, her laughter barely contained. "She's a walking joke now," she whispered gleefully. The prank was not just cruel. It was a public spectacle designed to make Alara a fool for daring to exist in their space. A great-aunt, Genevieve Croft, clucked her tongue and muttered to Jackson, "Serves her right for showing up dressed like that." Alara stood, still unaware of the note on her back, her focus unbroken. But the air around her was electric with their shared malice, a knife they twisted in her dignity with every glance and every snicker. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy doors opened again, and Elias Thornton entered. He was a man in his late 60s, his gray suit crisp and his face carved by decades of navigating the treacherous currents of fortunes and feuds. The room fell into a hushed reverence as he placed his worn leather briefcase on the polished table, the brass clasps clicking open with an air of finality. He retrieved a single, wax-sealed envelope, making no flourish or preamble. Adjusting his spectacles, he scanned the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the avaricious faces until it rested, for a fraction of a second, on Alara. In that fleeting moment, a look of profound, almost imperceptible respect passed between them, unsettling Kaylin, who frowned and muttered to his sister. What was that about? Before Thornton could speak, Alistair Finch, a former investor, whose pinstriped suit seemed to amplify his self-importance, surged to his feet. He pointed a trembling, indignant finger directly at Alara, his voice booming like a judge delivering a verdict. "This woman is a fraud," he declared. "Sterling would never have allowed someone of her caliber near his estate. She is here to scam us, plain and simple." The room buzzed with immediate, fervent agreement. Heads nodded vigorously, and eyes narrowed with suspicion, recasting Alara from a pathetic object of ridicule into a cunning thief caught in the act. Alistair's wife, dripping in emeralds that suddenly seemed cold and reptilian, added her voice to the chorus. "She's probably got forged documents in that rag of a bag." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Her very presence was now deemed a criminal offense they could not tolerate. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on Alara, each word a lash intended to strip her bare. But her gaze remained steady, fixed on the lawyer. Her silence, which they had first mistaken for weakness, now seemed to them an admission of guilt, further fueling their righteous outrage. Elias Thornton cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the rising murmur. "We are here," he stated, his voice calm but firm, "to read the last will and testament of Sterling Blackwood, executed 3 years ago and verified as authentic." A new ripple of whispers went through the room. 3 years. Sterling's private jet had vanished over the Pacific only 6 months ago. No wreckage, no body, just a void that had fueled headlines and, more importantly, their greed. Most assumed he had died. Most had hoped. Kaylin straightened his gold tie, his smirk returning. "Well, let's get on with it then. Who gets the keys to the kingdom?" Brielle leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on her phone, already composing a victory post in her mind. Genevieve Croft clutched her pearls, whispering to Jackson about the summer house in Nice. Alara stayed still, her bag now resting at her feet. She watched Elias Thornton's hands as he carefully broke the crimson wax seal. The crack echoed loudly in the tense silence. The entire room leaned in, a collective body holding its breath, their eyes hungry. This was it. The moment they had dressed for, schemed for, and flown across continents for. Elias Thornton unfolded the single sheet of heavy parchment, his voice steady and deliberate as he began to read. Each word was a stone dropped into the still, greedy waters of the room. I, Sterling Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my final will. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. To my family, my colleagues, and my associates, I leave you nothing but this truth. Wealth reveals character. It does not create worth. The room froze. A collective, silent shockwave passed through the crowd. Kalen's confident smile faltered and died on his lips. Brielle's phone slipped an inch in her grasp. Alistair Finch's jaw tightened, and the emeralds on his wife's neck suddenly seemed to weigh her down. Nothing? Someone whispered in disbelief. It has to be a mistake. Thornton continued, unfazed by the rising tension. All my assets, including all company shares, properties, financial accounts, and intellectual rights, are to be bequeathed in their entirety to one person. The room held its breath again. A flicker of hope rekindled. Perhaps this was just Sterling's dramatic way of cutting out the minor players. The lawyer's next words extinguished that hope forever. To the one who stood by me for no other reason than love, the one who never asked for my net worth and never sought my name for status. My beloved wife, Alara. A sharp, jagged gasp tore through the hall. Heads whipped around, eyes scanning the room for a face to match the name. Kalen barked a short, disbelieving laugh. Wife? Sterling wasn't married. This is a farce. Serafina's hand flew to her mouth, her crimson nails a stark contrast against her rapidly paling skin. Brielle's eyes narrowed, darting to her friend, who could only mouth the words, "What the hell?" Alistair Finch shot to his feet again, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. This is absurd. Logan never mentioned a wife. It's a scam. Someone has forged the damn thing. Genevieve Croft clutched Jackson's arm, her voice shrill with panic. She's not here, is she? Some gold digger we've never met, stealing what is rightfully ours? Elias Thornton held up a hand, silencing the burgeoning uproar. The will is legal, signed, and notarized. Supporting documents, including a marriage certificate, photographs, and personal letters, are available for verification. He reached back into his briefcase and withdrew a simple manila folder. He opened it and held up a photograph for all to see. It showed a younger Sterling, his face alight with a joyful, unreserved laugh. His arm was wrapped around a woman in a simple white dress, standing outside a courthouse. The woman was, unmistakably, Alara. The date printed on the back read 7 years prior. The room erupted. Kalen slammed his fist on the mahogany table. This is insanity. Who is she? Brielle stood, her phone forgotten, her voice shouting over the din. Where is this Alara? Show her! Jackson sneered, trying to cling to his bravado. Probably some con artist hiding in Belize by now. Serafina's voice, laced with venom, cut through the noise. If she's real, why isn't she here? Too ashamed to show her face? And then she moved. The movement was quiet, as deliberate and inevitable as a turning tide. Alara stepped away from the shadows of the window corner. Her flats made no sound on the marble, but every eye in the room followed her as she crossed the vast expanse of the hall. Her simple dress swayed with her steady gait, the linen catching the light. The faded blue cardigan seemed less a sign of poverty now, and more a banner of quiet defiance. She stopped beside Elias Thornton, her posture straight, her face a mask of calm composure. The unassuming cloth bag still hung from her shoulder. The silence that fell was absolute, a deafening void where the cacophony of greed had just been. Kalen's mouth opened, then closed, a fish gasping for air. His gold tie suddenly looked garish, a cheap costume piece. Brielle's face flushed a deep, mottled red, the image of her cruel social media post burning a hole in her mind. Alistair Finch sank back into his chair as if his bones had turned to water. The pearls around Genevieve Croft's neck seemed to tighten, her hand frozen mid-gesture. Elias Thornton nodded to Alara, a profound respect shining in his old eyes. Mrs. Blackwood, he said simply, handing her the folder. She took it without a tremor, her fingers steady as she opened it. She glanced at the photograph, and the barest hint of a smile touched her lips, a private memory of that day. Then she closed the folder and faced the room. I didn't come for the money, she said, and for the first time her voice filled the hall. It was not loud, but it was clear and low, like a bell tolling through a dense fog. "I came to see who you were, to see who among you cared for Sterling as a man, not a bank account. Who would mourn him, not his fortune." She paused, her hazel eyes sweeping over the crowd, pinning each of them in place. "You showed me exactly who you are." Kalen found his voice, though it was shaky and defiant. "You're saying you're his wife? You?" He gestured dismissively at her simple dress, his laugh forced and hollow. "Sterling Blackwood, married to this? No offense, lady, but you look like you shop at thrift stores." Alara didn't blink. "I do," she said simply, her honesty, a weapon they were unprepared for. Sterling didn't care. He loved me for who I am, not for what I wore or what I owned. Can any of you say the same? Brielle snorted, recovering a sliver of her audacity. "Nice act, but I'm not buying it. If you're his wife, where's the real proof?" "A photo can be faked." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, a last, desperate attempt by the crowd to cling to their disbelief. Alistair, finding his voice again, boomed, "She's right. We need more. Witnesses, records, something real." Elias Thornton, as if anticipating their demand, opened his briefcase once more. He laid out a stack of documents on the table with methodical precision. A marriage license, dated 7 years ago, signed by both parties and 2 witnesses, a nurse named Mrs. Albright and a librarian, Mr. Davies. He then produced a small stack of letters, personal correspondence from Sterling to Alara, handwritten. "The penmanship has been verified by forensic analysis." He continued, "Bank records detailing joint accounts, kept private at Sterling's explicit request." He paused, his hand hovering over the last item. It was a small, sleek USB drive, and of course, video footage from their wedding day. He inserted the drive into a laptop connected to a large, discreetly placed monitor on the wall. The screen flickered to life. The room held its breath as grainy, unpolished footage appeared. There were the courthouse steps from the photograph. There was Sterling in a simple suit, his face unguarded and filled with happiness. And there was Alara in her white dress, laughing as he kissed her. Standing nearby, clapping, were 2 ordinary people, an older woman with kind eyes and a middle-aged man with a gentle smile. The date and time stamp in the corner matched the certificate perfectly. The crowd's defiance crumbled into dust. Faces paled, and eyes darted from the screen to Alara, who watched the footage with a quiet, bittersweet ache in her gaze. Serafina was the first to break, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "This is a setup. You planned this, didn't you? Tricking us into what? Looking bad? You're a nobody. Sterling would never marry someone like you." Her words, meant to be daggers, fell harmlessly against Alara's composure. Alara let the accusation hang in the air for a moment before she spoke, her voice colder now, sharp enough to cut through their delusions. "You're right about one thing. This was planned. Not to trick you, but to test you. To see if any of you cared enough to ask who I was before you mocked me. To see if you would honor Sterling's memory or just claw at his wealth." She took a step closer to them, her presence seeming to fill the entire grand hall. "You failed, all of you." Jackson Cole laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "A test? What is this? A game show? You can't be serious." But his voice wavered as Alara's steady, unyielding eyes met his. She reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a small, simple remote. "Sterling isn't dead," she said, each word landing with the force of a physical blow. "He's alive, and he's been watching you this whole time." She pressed a button. The monitor on the wall clicked, the wedding video vanishing. It was replaced by a live camera feed from a dimly lit room. There, seated in a leather armchair, was Sterling Blackwood, 42 years old, lean, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, his blue eyes as sharp and piercing as ever. He leaned back, his expression calm but unyielding, like a judge weighing souls. The camera feed was live. The timestamp in the corner ticked forward, the 15th of April, 2025. 10:32 a.m. The room didn't just gasp, it exploded. Shouts, cries of disbelief, a symphony of shock and horror. Kalen stumbled backward, his gold tie askew. Brielle dropped her phone, the screen shattering on the marble floor. Alistair's wife clutched his arm, whispering, "No, it can't be." The string of Genevieve Croft's pearl necklace snapped, the beads scattering across the floor like tiny, fallen teeth. Through the speakers, Sterling's voice filled the hall low, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You thought I was gone. You thought this was your chance to carve up my life's work like a cake. But I've been here, watching, listening, every word, every sneer, every lie." His gaze on the screen shifted, as if he were looking through the camera directly at Alara. "She warned me you would show your true colors. She was right." As his words echoed, the great oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and Sterling Blackwood walked in. He was real, solid, his presence a gathering storm. His suit was simple, his shoes scuffed from travel. The crowd parted before him, as if by an invisible force, their whispers dying, their bravado evaporating into the suddenly cold air. He crossed the room and stopped beside Alara, his hand finding hers, a quiet anchor. She looked up at him, her eyes softening for the first time, and he gave her a small, affirming nod. He faced the room, his voice carrying effortlessly. "Alara designed this. The will, the reading, the cameras, all of it. She wanted to know who you were when you thought no one was watching. Who would respect a stranger? Who would show a shred of kindness? Who cared about me, not my bank account?" He paused, his eyes of blue ice sweeping over them. "Not one of you passed." His gaze locked onto Kalen, the man who had mocked his wife first. "You called my wife a maid," Sterling said, his voice a lethal whisper. Kalen shrank, his hands fumbling with the gold tie that now felt like a gaudy noose. "You're not family, Kalen. You're a parasite, and I'm done feeding you." A security guard, materializing as if from nowhere, appeared at Kalen's side and began to escort him out, his protest drowned in the stunned silence. Sterling then turned his attention to Brielle, whose face was ashen. "You turned my wife into a meme for your own amusement," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "But lies don't last, Brielle." He nodded to Elias Thornton. The lawyer tapped a key on his laptop. Brielle's shattered phone, still on the floor, began to buzz violently. On the large monitor, her social media profile appeared, and they all watched in horrified fascination as it was dismantled live. Posts were deleted, follower counts plummeted by the thousands, and notifications of terminated sponsorship deals flashed across the screen. "You are banned from my companies, my properties, and my life," Sterling said as a guard took her arm. One by one, they were judged and dismissed. Alistair and his wife, for their loud accusations. Serafina, for her cruel laughter. Jackson, for his childish prank. Genevieve Croft, whose scattered pearls crunched under the guard's shoes as she was led away, a fitting end to her pride. When the doors finally closed, the vast hall was quiet and nearly empty. Only a handful of people remained. 3, to be exact. An older woman with kind eyes, Mrs. Albright, the nurse from the wedding video. A middle-aged man with a gentle face, Mr. Davies, the librarian who had given Alara a quiet nod of recognition when she entered. And a young woman in a simple uniform, Maria, a groundskeeper who had seen Alara waiting outside and offered her a glass of water, no questions asked. Sterling turned to them, his voice finally losing its hard edge. "You saw her. You didn't judge. That is what family means." He looked at Alara, his hand tightening around hers. "You were right about all of it." Alara's gaze lingered on the empty chairs, the spilled champagne, and the broken pearls. "I didn't want to be right," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I wanted them to be better." She faced the 3 who remained, her eyes warm now. "Thank you for seeing me. You are more than they could ever understand," Sterling murmured, for her alone. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed her face, and leaned into him, her faded cardigan brushing against his sleeve. The room was clean now, the vultures gone, the truth laid bare. Elara had never wanted the empire. She had only wanted the man, whole and alive, and hers. Now, with the world stripped down to its essential truths, they stood together, unshaken. Outside, the hills glowed green under the April sky, and the cameras, their work done, blinked off.